Hello everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and in today's video we will continue talking about Plato's political philosophy with reference to the political science exam for the CSS. And in our last video we discussed Plato's political philosophy with reference to his idea of ideal state, philosopher king, his theory of education, his theory on censorship of art and literature, and the equality of genders. So in today's video we will be of course discussing we'll be taking a step further and we'll be discussing his theory of justice, which is very important. And since the theory of justice is kind of complicated, very important, I decided to discuss it in a separate video. So before we move forward, this is just a review of what we majorly studied about Plato's political philosophy with reference to CSS. It is important for your essay as well. And the idea of Plato's political philosophy revolves around city-state. The idea of his governance is revolving around city-state. So for that reference, one must know what a city-state is. Certain characteristics of city-state, for example, its particular population, which according to Plato should be 50-40, which means 5,040. And then if we come to Plato's concept of justice, which is of course the most important topic of Plato's political philosophy, especially with reference to CSS. So when we talk about Plato's political philosophy, it is important to know that in his book Republic, he talks about justice not as a moral quality but as a foundation of an ideal state, and he represents justice through a dialogue format in his book. Where he basically narrates the discussion and debates of Socrates with characters like Cephalus, Polymarchus, Thrasymachus, and Glaucon. Now it is quite possible that I could be pronouncing their names wrong, because I don't think they are native to English language. So there could be a few pronunciation errors, but since our exam is written, so I don't think it would be a bigger issue for the students to understand or to write it. So to understand Plato's idea of justice, he kind of posed this question that what justice is, and he tried to explain it through a dialogue in his book Republic. And while explaining this dialogue, he writes down Socrates' interaction with different people. So first of all, he talks about Cephalus. So Cephalus says that justice is honesty and fulfilling legal obligations. Now Cephalus was like a traditional man who lived in Greece, in Athens, and he said that justice is like leading a good life by being honest and paying your debts and fulfilling your legal and moral obligations. So, his major point was that justice is about personal morality, staying true to your word and obeying the law. Basically doing right to everyone. This is what Cephalus's point of view was. And if you talk about Polymarchus was of the view that justice is helping friends and harming enemies. So Polymarchus was actually the son of Cephalus, and he believed that justice is doing good to your allies but doing harm to your enemies. But Polymarchus kind of, he explained justice in terms of loyalty, and this is somewhat where, Socrates disagreed with him, because according to him, justice was, a virtue. And being virtuous or any morality does not tell you to be even bad with your enemy. So this was kind of rejected by Socrates, and this is how, Plato narrates the entire debate and discussion. And then we have Thrasymachus, who says that justice is the will of the stronger. So he was basically a sophist, and we discussed who sophists were in our previous video regarding Plato. And he said that justice is just a trick by the powerful. He says that laws are made by rulers to protect their own interests, not because they are truly fair. So basically, the rule and regulations are in the favor of the powerful people. He explains it through an example that a king makes a law that benefits the rich and calls it justice. But really, it's only helping the ruling class. Now, Thrasymachus basically, to summarize, he says that justice is a tool for the powerful to control the weak. And he believes that real world justice has nothing to do with fairness. It's all about power. And then when we talk about Glaucon says that justice is a social compromise. Now, he was a very, pragmatic person who said that, he challenged Socrates' idea of justice, of being morality and virtual entity. He basically said that people are not naturally just. They act justly only because they are afraid of the consequences or the punishments. Justice is kind of a social contract, a deal to avoid suffering. For example, if there were no police or punishments, people would steal, lie, or cheat. They behave only because they fear being caught and punished. And to summarize, we can say that Glaucon believed that justice is not about moral goodness, it's a practical agreement to live peacefully in society. And Socrates basically rejected all these forms of justice. And this is how Plato then kind of forms his theory of what justice is. And he says that, justice is basically harmony in the soul and society. He says that every individual performs their appropriate role, and this justice and harmony in society is explained by him by the classification of the society, and by saying that each class does its own work without interfering in any other class. So basically, he promotes the idea of non-interference, harmony, and interdependency. So basically, for Plato, justice is to mind your own business, to be happy in the class that you are born in, to take advantage of the opportunities that are being given to you. So basically, Plato looks at justice as a means to ensure social harmony, where, every individual is in their perfect position, and they perform their role for which they are best suited by nature without interfering with others. So Plato says that justice means everyone is minding their own business, and he explains justice at two levels. So if we talk about the division of, or how he explains justice at two levels, it is basically the individual level and the state level. So at individual level, it means that justice is all about harmony among reasoning, spirit, and appetite within the soul. If you remember, we talked about the classification of society, and we classified different sections and different classes in society with reference to human instincts, which were, reasoning, courage, and hunger or temperance. So at the same time, Plato says that justice is not about, just morality with other people. Justice is something which is practiced within and outside a person's being. So when we talk about justice being practiced within an individual, it means that a person needs to keep a balance within their different aspects, between their rising, appetite, between the spirit and reasoning, that makes them a good and responsible citizen. So basically, the individual idea of justice is to help an individual become a good, responsible citizen and administrator that would eventually transform them into good philosopher kings, right? And then at state level, the idea of justice means to create harmony among the three classes, which are rulers, auxiliaries, and producers, to help sustain an environment of harmony, independence, and non-interference. So basically, each class is working in their own specific department. They are not interfering with one another, yet there's a lot of harmony, and at the same time they're interdependent with each other, because the society cannot move forward without the rulers being in correlation to the auxiliaries, and the producers contributing in the national economy and all that stuff. So with this reference, it is also important to know that the producers at that time are also referred. So basically, the slaves at that time are also referred to as producers, because Greece had slave economy at that time. Even though Plato does not explicitly mention slaves in his philosophy, but it is important to know that when he's talking about producers, he's kind of institutionalizing and normalizing the idea of slaves working and being in their just position, in a position where they rightfully deserve to be in. And he also kind of supports this by saying that their presence, their hard work is important for the auxiliaries and the rulers to get going the affairs of the state. So basically, to summarize, we can say that justice maintains balance and order internally in a person and externally in a society. And as I mentioned before, the classic philosophers like Aristotle and Plato have always given much importance to, morality, virtues, and basically, their entire idea of political philosophy revolves around political morality. So basically, if an individual is balanced in his mind and soul, then the society will also be transformed in a very balanced way. Okay, so this was the major chunk about, Plato's idea of justice. And now we move forward talking about, a brief summary of whatever we have discussed about Plato's political philosophy, because these are the major ideas that are, asked by the examiner in the paper. So I think we should move forward and discuss about the summary, so that I hope all of it does not get juggled in your head. So if we talk about the summary, it is important to know that we studied about, of course, his concept of justice, which we discussed just right now. And then, of course, his idea of ideal state, where he talks about the division of society in three different classes, and his idea of philosopher king, which says that philosophy kind of, increases or incites wisdom and morality and courage in an individual, and hence a philosopher king is a perfect person to rule rather than someone else. And then he talks about equality of genders, which we discussed in his theory of education. And then he talks about the tripartite soul, which means that he talks about the internal concept of justice. And of course, he also talks about censorship of art and collectivism. Collectivism is basically, the communism of family and property. And then he talks about the theory of forms. So the theory of forms basically means that we always say that Plato is an ideal philosopher. It is because he has his theory of forms, in which he says that all the things, all the concepts that we see around our world are imperfect. He's an ideal philosopher because he believes in the perfect idea of all the things that we see around us. He believes that, the society can never be perfect. A real world society can never be perfect, but a good state must try to imitate the perfect form of justice. So, when we study that the philosopher king should be ruling, the justice should be like this, the equality of genders should be this way. So basically, from a very pragmatic point of view, this is unattainable. But his theory of forms says that yes, he is well aware of the fact that the kind of concept he is pleading for or advocating for are unattainable, but at least an individual or a society must try their best to achieve at least, 80% of that, so that, morally and administratively, the individuals, the society can lead towards a better and towards a better construction of, future generations. So this is basically a summary of what we have discussed up till now. So of course, every philosophy has its own criticism, and it's very important to know, because the examiner could ask question in this sense as well. So a few criticism points that are often levied against Plato's philosophy are mentioned here. So the first is that many people believe that his philosophy is very utopian. It is unachievable and it is very impractical, as I mentioned in his theory of forms, that he believes that the philosopher king should know the difference between the real world and the world of forms, and the philosopher king must try to achieve that perfection. So achieving that perfection, the idea of philosopher king ruling and the division of society is very impractical. It is something that is not workable in today's society, and of course it is very authoritarian. It is a very authoritarian state that he talks about. He talks about a kind of dictatorship by the philosopher king, a philosopher king who will be, controlling the property and the kind of family structure that the people are going to have. And then, of course, it also kind of, supports the suppression of individual freedom, where the state is the goal, and not individual wellness is just a means to, gain the wellness of the state. Basically, Plato talks about individual morality and all that stuff, but all of it is just a way to ensure the betterment of state, of governance, and to, make the society run in a better way. So basically, the society is given more importance over the individual. And individual freedom in terms of property, in terms of family values, family rights is not granted. And then there's a very rigid class structure, as we know that, this strict watertight compartmentalization of three classes is not possible. This kind of, limits the individual growth. An individual cannot survive in such a society. For example, an auxiliary cannot remain an auxiliary for their entire life. Like a civil servant might need to change, like a change of profession. A professional change is something that he does not talk about. He does not talk about how, different classes in society can merge, or they can, change their jobs, or is there a way to, talk about professional growth. He does not talk about it, which means that this rigid class structure will actually reduce individual growth or professional development. And of course, the idea of communism of family and property is very unrealistic, because this could suppress natural family ties. And then of course, with respect to modern democratic ideals, it conflicts a lot with it. For example, in modern democratic ideals, we talk about freedom, equality, and popular will, and these are some concepts that are completely opposite to Plato's political thought. And then of course, he talked about the censorship of art and literature. And he also talked about, he neglected the economic and material needs. Basically, there was too much focus on philosophical ideals and little attention to economic realities. His entire philosophy was too idealistic for a very well-functioning society with respect to contemporary challenges that are mostly deep-rooted in economic and financial troubles, and he neglected the common people. For example, if you look into his philosophy, we see that it's more about the philosopher king. It is about the kind of education they should have, the kind of, the role they have in society and all such thing. For an individual, he does not talk with so much passion. He does say that, if people have that kind of courage, they have that kind of capabilities and talents, they can be, they can become a part of the ruling class. But he does not explain how and why can that happen. So basically, it just lacks a roadmap for common people. And the majority, basically, the common people are basically in the majority. The elite are the philosopher kings, and his philosophy revolves around them only. And it's also very vague about practical governance. It does not tell that how the ideal state would practically operate in day-to-day matters. It does not talk about taxation, war, or any such things. And of course, as I mentioned before, it actually propagates the idea of a static society wherein individual growth is limited. Innovation and progress could be discouraged in Plato's rigid system. And then, of course, he also talks about how he ignored the historical change. He did not talk about, the adaptability for real-world dynamics and the kind of knowledge and power incompatibility between these two things. He believes that the more knowledgeable someone is, the more power they have to rule over people. But that's not true, because knowledge does not always ensure that you have those practical skills to rule over the people. And of course, he was abandoned in his later works. His successor, Aristotle, did not agree with most of his theoretical frameworks and most of his ideas. So yeah, this is how, most of the philosophies are. There are great ideas, great likings for them, but at the same time, there's a lot of criticism as well. And while discussing about Plato's philosophy, the criticism must also be kept in mind. So yes, this was the video for today. I hope you liked it. And in my next video, I'll be talking about Aristotle's political philosophy. Thank you.